Mississippi State has hired a defensive coordinator. Hey, Dad, fill us in.
I don't have a lot to fill on this guy. I know his name. I know his name is Coleman Hutzler. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly.
You are pronouncing that
been
correctly.
around. A guy who's been at a lot of good schools. He was at Alabama this past season as the outside linebackers coach and special teams coordinator. He was a co-defensive coordinator at Texas in 2020. He was at Ole Miss with Jeff Lebby. He was special teams coordinator for the Rebels there. Also, he's coached at Boston College and at Florida and at South Carolina. So he's been around. But this is his first. If he is indeed the defensive coordinator by himself, this will be his first time doing that, right. Which is interesting when you think about Lebby's comments at this first press conference about basically saying he wanted to get an experienced defensive coordinator. And yes, like I said, he was the co-defensive coordinator for Texas in 2020, but that's the limit of his defensive coordinating experience. So a very out-of-the-blue hire. This is not a guy that was getting a lot of talk on any message board or hot list you would have for defensive coordinator. You know, there was a lot of focus on, like we said, on DJ Durkin, on Tom Allen, a few other names. But this is a guy, when Ross Dellinger tweeted this earlier today, I was just like, who is his name?
So,
and then I immediately, this is my favorite part, Richard. So the coaches at Alabama, right? So you reach out to your friends. Like I reached out to John Talty from Bama 24/7. I'm like, hey, what about this guy? He's like, never talked to him. Great.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John. Nick Saban's policy on not letting assistant coaches is biting me right now.
Well, may I fill in a couple of gaps for you?
By all means.
Do you remember when Ole Miss played Louisville in Atlanta on Labor Day night to open the 2021 season?
Yeah.
And Lane Kiffin had the late positive test for the old vid and did not make the trip. He made Coleman Hutzler the acting head coach for that particular night. I know being a defensive coordinator is different than being an acting head coach or a special teams coordinator or whatever else. But of the guys that were on that staff, and this was a couple of years ago when I was still with them for every game and kind of, not that I was ever close with anybody on staff or in the program. I knew lots of people, but I had a little different vantage point, I felt like, at that point than I do now. And I liked the way that Coleman Hutzler operated. He was a guy that looked to me like that's a future head coach. Will he be? I have no idea. But I liked the way that he carried himself. I liked the way that he interacted with players. I liked the way that he interacted with other people. He didn't seem to be a guy that got too high or too low. So from that standpoint, this feels like a really good addition to Jeff Lebby's staff. But it is curious to hire someone who has never called a defensive play sheet before.
Yeah.
And I understand co-defensive coordinator. We know how the co-titles work, right? There's somebody that's in charge, and then the other guy gets a title so that they can pay him more money.
Right.
And I don't even remember who the defensive coordinator was in 2020 at Texas. I don't. Doesn't matter. We saw that at Ole Miss a couple years ago, right? DJ Durkin and Chris Partridge were co-defensive coordinators. There wasn't but one defensive coordinator on that staff, and it was DJ Durkin.
Chris Ash, who is the former Rutgers coach, was the DC at Texas. He's the guy that looks exactly like Andy Bernard from The Office.
Okay.
Oh, now I've got to Google him.
So, the staff composition at Mississippi State, is it full now? Is that everybody? Or there's still some?
No,
okay.
they have not. I haven't seen anything really official or even really unofficial on secondary coaches. And, I assume that Hutzler will handle the linebackers David Turner obviously is there for the defensive backs, but cornerbacks and safeties, and special teams. They don't unless he's going to. I don't think he's going to coordinate both. So they need a special teams coach.
Yeah. So this staff composition at this point it's a little interesting. There are a handful of guys from the previous staff that they decided to keep, and maybe with good reason. Let's just walk through the assistants that are on staff at this point. Let's do that. All right, so let's walk through State's coaching staff. And this isn't like I just want to talk about it. It's not even remotely a criticism. Coaches hire who they know. And the longer you've been in the business, the more relationships you have, and the more branches. That's not even right, because I'm not necessarily talking about head coaches. I'm talking about even assistant coaches. If you've worked lots of places and built relationships with lots of people, your network is bigger than it is if you've been a limited number of places. So the way Jeff Lebby so far, and he's not done yet, has constructed this staff, carryovers from the previous staff. David Turner on the defensive line. Chad Bumpus working with wide receivers. Are there any other carryovers, or is it just those two?
Those are the only two on-the-field carryovers.
And then Greg Knox is in a new professional development program that they're kind of instituting.
He, Jason Washington, and Gary Green are all holdovers as far as support staff goes.
Cody Kennedy is going to be the offensive line coach. He has most recently been on staff at Arkansas since 2021 as the offensive line coach with the Razorbacks. And
teach him how to block right.
Do what now?
He's going to teach him how to block right.
It's kind of the job, isn't it?
Well, look at him. Who does he look like? You got a picture of him up?
I don't have a picture.
He's not getting the reference. It's kind of you got to really be paying attention to get that.
He looks like Malcolm Reed.
So how to barbecue
he could
right,
be his brother.
How to block right. Yeah.
How to block right. That's what we're going with. Let's get to blocking.
Check out his website, how to BLCK or
right.
BLK right.
How to OL right. How to OL right.
There you go.
Yeah.
So you had Cody Kennedy.
Let's get to blocking is a good thing. I might go with that.
Anthony Tucker joins the staff. He worked with Jeff Lebby at UCF and was most recently at Indiana, where he worked with wide receivers and was the co-offensive coordinator. So probably in a spot where he was looking for a new opportunity after Tom Allen was let go. You have John Cooper working with tight ends. He was the offensive line coach at North Texas most recently. And if you go back a couple of years, he was on staff with Lebby at UCF. Matt Holochek is the quarterbacks coach. He has worked with quarterbacks under Jeff Lebby for the last 4 years, the last 2 seasons at Oklahoma, the 2 years before that at Ole Miss. And then this is a loose tie. This feels to me like one of those, hey, I need a recommendation. Shawd Williams is the new head strength and conditioning coach. He was an assistant strength and conditioning coach at Oregon, where the head strength and conditioning coach is Wilson Love, who was with Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss and before that at UCF. So there would be a fairly long relationship with Wilson Love, and I'm just kind of connecting the dots. I mean, that feels like a phone call that would have been like, hey, who do you recommend? And Wilson was like, hey, I got a guy right here. This is who you need to go with. So, what do you think of the way the staff has come together so far?
The thing I like about the offensive staff is these are all guys that have worked with Lebby in some form or fashion, or in Kennedy's case, he worked with Kendall Briles. So, sort of the same, kind of, the same, they're cousins of the same offense there. So, with Barbay, they hired the whole staff before they hired Kevin Barbay. And so you asked him to install an offense with coaches that he wasn't familiar with. He didn't hire he didn't bring those guys in with him.
And more importantly, who weren't familiar with him.
Exactly. There was no familiarity whatsoever. So for this, one thing I like about this, because there's certainly not a big name in there. I mean, I think the biggest name is Bumpus as far as Mississippi State fans go. But these are all guys who have worked with Lebby. They know the offense, so the transition and the installation should be as seamless as possible from a coaching standpoint.
How are State fans feeling about this, hey, Dad? I mean, based on people you've talked to, interaction you've seen, had online or whatever, because a lot of talk about, to your point a second ago, DJ Durkin or Tom Allen or some other big experienced names that have been out there, and then you're like, I mean, your reaction to Coleman Hutzler was, who?
Yeah, never heard of the guy. And I think there is some of that, especially when you know, like I said, Lebby's comments sort of led you to believe they wanted an experienced guy, a guy who had done this for many, many years before. And so that sort of goes away from that. You know, you also, when you hear things like and this is something I've decided I will not be buying this particular line anymore. But when I hear about, they've increased the salary pool so they can get some big time assistants, and it never happens. It just doesn't ever happen at Mississippi State for whatever reason. So they didn't do. I mean, they may have increased the salary pool. These guys might make some good money, but none of these guys are, like I said, or what you would call a big hire, or they might really gets people saying, "Oh, okay, that guy's going to Mississippi State. That's a big deal." So, they still have to put this defensive staff together. They still got some work to do there, but defensively, I mean, I don't know. It's really a complete unknown for me with Coleman Hutzler. That's gonna be difficult.
It is.
I'm gonna start calling him Coach. He's Coach Hutz. There we go. Coach Hutz is he's got to put his staff together. But I mean, you're talking about a guy who doesn't have a whole lot of experience.
You could really
I've been saying for a long time
and be like C Hutz.
C Hutz. We'll see how it goes.
Please don't.
I've been saying for a long time that State, it's better to lose. If you're going to lose, stop. Just stop. It's better to lose 45-41 than it is to lose 14-10. Might be trying to test that theory at Mississippi State these next couple of years.
Yeah, a lot of learning on the fly for the two coordinators, if you want to call them that, this year at State. I mean, you've got a first-time head coach and a first-time defensive coordinator taking over a Mississippi State team that is going to have some roster turnover. There, I mean, not to be a downer, but there is a chance that you're going to experience some growing pains in year one. I mean, that is entirely possible. I think
very, very possible.
What you should look for is growth in year one, and not necessarily results. Like if they don't go 8-4, that's okay as long as you saw progress and forward movement. That's what you didn't see from Arnett. That's why that became so dire. It never got any better, and it looked really, really bad, and not even inconsistent, consistently bad, and like they were in over their heads as a staff and a team. And you can go 5-7 and not look like that, right, and feel better about program direction, if that makes sense.
You want it to look like Mullen's first year did at Mississippi State. Took over for Kroom. Those teams were so offensively challenged. And then he came in, and even though they lost games, you were like, okay, you can see that they're getting better, that once they get some talent in here, they'll be okay. That's what you kind of want from Lebby in year one. Now, his out-of-conference schedule is much easier than Mullen's was year one, where he played two top 25 teams out of conference. So, the opportunity to maybe go 6-6 will be there and get to a bowl game, which I think would be a fantastic year. This isn't the 80s or the 90s where, you talk about a rebuild and it's going to be, it's a 3-4 year process. You got to let the guy get his players in, and when they're juniors and seniors, you can be better. That's not the case anymore. With the portal, a rebuild, you can have a down year, and then by year two, you need to be up and running. That's what I think. This is the year one of a rebuild for Mississippi State.